in the last class that we had, well, kind of, I had you look at our decision to drop the atomic bomb, that we looked at all the things happening in the Pacific War, why America felt so much that we needed to drop the bomb, and then I made a major point that we really regretted dropping the bomb. All the reasons were there, but we still couldn't escape what we had done. And with this experience of the survivors, we don't much touch on it now, but there was a major malaise over the United States, a literal depression where everyone kind of didn't want to talk about Japan and what happened to Japan. We all felt shame for the bomb. So, with that in mind, now that nuclear weapons are an option, we need to talk about why they never can be used. I really wish I could do this in person. This is one of my better presentations because of how much research I've done on this. But this is the best we're going to get, and we'll get some of it when we come back. For instance, what's very much missing is duck and cover, and I'm saving that for the next time I get to see you. So, the threat of nuclear war. Well, in order to get into this, let's first get some key terms out of the way. The entire purpose of the bomb is mutually assured destruction, or MAD. Whoever shoots first dies second. There is no winning in a nuclear war. The military brass throughout would try and talk about numbers and survival rates. In the end, millions, hundreds of millions, if not billions of people will die in no matter what kind of nuclear war happens. Life as we know it ends completely. This quarantine would not even scratch the surface of how much life would change in a nuclear war. So there is no win, and all sides need to understand that. And we practice mutually assured destruction. We practice showing the importance of mutually assured destruction through deterrence. These terms are very much interlinked. All of the bombs that would be created, all of the increasingly absurd weapons, all of the testing was done as a form of deterrence. Show the other side, remind them why they can't use their weapons. Without either of these, it all ends and nuclear war becomes a real possibility. There is no defense against a nuclear war. You cannot shoot down all of the missiles. You're talking about something that's going hypersonic, multiple times the speed of sound, and trying to shoot it down with something else that's hypersonic. And you're talking about hundreds of missiles at a time, not to mention bombers and submarines and so on. You can't do it. There is no defense. And even trying violates mutually assured destruction, where if we were to create a missile defense system, under George W. Bush in the early 2000s, we tried to set up a missile defense system in Poland, and Russia freaked out. And the American public had a very hard time wrapping their head around, why is Russia so afraid of this defense mechanism? Well, if we can shoot down their missiles, what protection do they have that we're not going to fire off our missiles, right? We could fire and attack them without the retaliation, without mutually assured destruction. And so Russia saw this defensive measure as a major offensive weapon, and therefore the whole program would eventually be scrapped. Deterrence, making sure that the other side doesn't use theirs. There are a couple terms I want to also throw in here. Atomic weapons and nuclear weapons are often very much intermixed as far as terms. They are two different things. The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and of course the Trinity test, were all atomic bombs. They use fission. They split an atom of a large molecule, large atom like uranium or plutonium, and that forces a major explosion, a major release of energy. A nuclear bomb is fusion. You are taking hydrogen atoms, and under intense heat from an explosion, its explosion starts another explosion, kind of like dynamite, or it needs a percussion cap, or how we talked about those flintlocks, you need some kind of spark to start it off. Well, the spark is an explosion. In these fusion weapons, you are doing what literally happens in the core of the sun. You are taking the basic power of the universe and unleashing it on the surface of the Earth for a split second. And in theory, this fusion is unlimited. You could take unlimited amounts to make a bigger and bigger and bigger bomb. And if you watch the YouTube video that I attached before this, you understand how big those bombs can get. This is what we all have today. The atomic bomb is obsolete. We have not created one since we made the fusion bomb in 1949. There's no purpose to it. There is a limit to its size. And what's also important is the delivery weapon. ICBMs are intercontinental ballistic missiles. These are the missiles to get weapons to their target. I actually just saw one at the Titan Missile Museum outside of Tucson, Arizona. Amazing. I hope to include some photos of this as I build my lessons. You'll see some of that, I'm sure. In all this, you need a delivery weapon. Bombers are the most rudimentary way to do that. You can build a very large plane and get it there, but planes are very easy to shoot down, and so they have largely gone away. The missile is the way it's done, and why North Korea has not been a valid threat, even though they have a nuclear weapon. They have no way to get it here, or at least not farther than the West Coast. So with that in mind, you need both a bomb and a way to get it somewhere, and without both, you really are not a threat. All of this creates a paranoia. We talked about what happened in World War I with the constant shelling. Well, now you have it less obvious, less constant, less on a specific group. You have now the entire public. That surprise attack could come at any moment. That bombers could fly over the North Pole. Missiles could hit us in just 30 minutes. And so you get a pressure on Americans that we don't really understand. This threat is still ongoing. It's not like nuclear weapons have gone away. It's the question of, well, who's going to do it to us? And we don't have the big bad like we did in the Soviet Union. So this paranoia has a tremendous impact on everything in American life. There were talks of, should we disband cities and spread them out as far as possible because you're just creating targets for the Soviets. People built fallout shelters in order to try and make it so their families could survive. And something that perhaps you understand, that the civil defense was the government agency created to try and get as much information out to the public as possible. And civil defense instructed people, whoever is able, to build fallout shelters, to build underground, built-up shelters filled with food and water and obviously toilet paper in order to house everyone for at least 2 weeks, because that's how long it would take for nuclear fallout to dispense to a survivable level. And people actually did this. People did build fallout shelters. Now, as the bombs get bigger and bigger, people kind of gave up on the idea that you don't need this. You're not going to live anyways. But you'll still see some of the signs here on the left corner on buildings that have fallout shelters. I saw one in the wild just last year. It's one I had never realized was there before. So even those buildings might not know where exactly those shelters are anymore or what room was dedicated for that purpose back in the day, but you'll still see those signs. This was a very real thing. Let's understand what happens in a nuclear explosion, because it is a step-by-step process that happens. First, you get the detonation. That detonation is usually done above a target. You can have either a ground burst or an air burst. A ground burst would throw a lot more dirt up into the air. That dirt is highly radioactive following the explosion, and it will spread on the wind for hundreds, if not thousands of miles and cause a lot of death that way. However, with it being on the ground, that takes a lot of the impact of the nuclear weapon, and so you get less of a crater. You get less impact on destruction of the widespread destruction of a city. So it's a choice made. And while many cities would have multiple targets, you'll get one ground burst and then a bunch of air bursts, because an air burst sends that shot directly downward, creating a mass explosion that wipes out a whole lot of city. The flash that follows will blind you if you're looking at it. If you're within a certain distance, it will literally melt the retinas in the back of your eyeballs. It is a blinding flash unlike anything you can imagine. Even from 10 miles away, you're talking about intense sunburn that happens in a split second. The flash is dangerous at any distance, really, and you should not look at it. How do you know not to look at it? You don't. If it happens in front of you, you don't have that choice. That goes at the speed of light. At the speed of sound is the shock wave, and it emanates out from the impact of the bomb at about 200 miles per hour plus, following winds that are that are going after it. It will knock you down. This is the pressure wave that knocks down buildings. This is the actual sledgehammer blow of the explosion. This is really what you see. And when we look at videos, when you see, okay, you see the flash, and then I want you to wait and see for the shock wave to go through. I want you to watch for it. Then comes the fireball and heat. The initial bit starts following the flash because obviously it travels at the speed of light. And you'll see water vapor just pouring out of things as items are broiled right out in the open. And you'll see all of that off-gassing happen. This vaporizes you as it keeps going. There were people in Hiroshima who were reduced to shadows on a wall where you could see where they were based on the shadow from this fireball. It's intense. Then the wind, after that shockwave goes out, you get what's unexpected, and the wind changes direction and blows back in towards the explosion. The mushroom cloud is rising, and all that hot air rising is taking a lot of air in with it, and so air has to pull back in order to fill that gap. And you'll see things blast outward and then flex back inward, and I'll point that out as we see the videos. Then comes the radiation. Radiation is invisible, and it emanates out in all directions from this. And when we do, I have a simulation of what actually happens in a nuclear attack, and we'll take a better look at it there. This radiation is sending outwards of neutrons just bursting out of things. And you can't feel it, but it is punching holes in your DNA. And DNA is the instructions that your body uses to build itself and rebuild itself. So as the body rebuilds itself, it is misreading these instructions because there are now holes in it, which causes cancers. If you're close enough, it will break down the cell membranes, and you will literally start to bleed through your skin. Radiation sickness, it just all kind of rots off your body as everything breaks down, and your body can no longer hold itself together as a unit. It's heinous and terrible. That initial radiation loses its lethality over about 2 weeks, but what lingers is fallout. Lingering radiation on dust particles, in dirt, in the air, on things, and that can last for between weeks and years, depending on the type of radiation, depending on the type of explosive. It can be literally thousands of years before it breaks down to a non-lethal level. So even if you survive and you survive the initial radiation and you stayed in your fallout shelter so you didn't have any of these issues, cancer rates, death rates, all of this is going to go up for a very, very long time. What also comes with a nuclear explosion, and what scares me personally the most, is an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP. A wave of high voltage electricity emanates out from the bomb. They didn't expect this to happen. They had no reason to know that this would happen until they started doing these tests, and they noticed it. They initially thought the Soviets were testing some sort of new superweapon. No, it came from their own nuclear weapons. This wave of high voltage electricity knocks out everything that uses electricity. There would not be a light bulb in action for hundreds of miles. So no cell phones. All the electronics that make a car work, dead. Everything you can think of that moves using electricity is no more. Instantly, you snap back to the 1800s. And what's scariest is that a DARPA agency figured that if you exploded a nuclear weapon about 100 miles above Iowa, you would take out the entire electrical grid for all of the continental United States in an instant. That quickly, we're back into the 1800s. Planes falling out of the sky, cars dying on the middle of the road, no communication anywhere. Electricity is no more. And that is terrifying. Following a nuclear attack, the radiation lingers in lethal doses for hours in the dust. There were people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki who survived simply because they changed clothes. Not knowing any of this, they simply put on a new set of clothes because they had been, covered in dirt and debris, so they changed and then went and helped people. And a lot more of those people lived than the people who didn't, simply because the dust carries the radiation. The first thing you do in one of these situations is brush yourself off. It's the least you can do. Radiation lingers at dangerous levels for days. Don't spend more than a few minutes outside for about 2 weeks. That's what the CDC recommends, and I do have the flyer for that. I'll either attach it or I'll pass it out whenever we talk about this in class. And radiation will linger at unhealthy levels for weeks and years. The thing that they figured out in the early 1980s, and the thing that began to really push an anti-nuclear movement. There was always an anti-nuclear movement, but this one really started to push home that this can never happen, is the idea of nuclear winter. In any nuclear attack, there's going to be a lot of dirt and debris ejected high into the atmosphere, and that takes a very long time to come back down. Fine particles on the winds, it takes a while. Like the dust storms of the Great Depression, like the Dust Bowl, it's the same thing, only it's now radioactive dirt. As this happens, it blocks out the sun, and even a small percentage of blocking out the sun has tremendous effects on the ground. That as this stays airborne and you get more and more dirt and less sunlight, you start to reduce temperatures. So you could create an artificial ice age. And what runs on sunlight the most? Plants. Our food source. And if not your food source, what your food source eats. That without the crops, we would not only have this artificial ice age, we would also create a major famine as we killed plant life around the globe. This whole thing is referred to as nuclear winter, that we could artificially create a new ice age and destroy mankind that even lasts through the attack. This is what would happen if according to the estimates, it would not take a large-scale nuclear exchange. Just a few dozen bombs, a limited nuclear exchange, could have severe impacts on the climate and turn us into a major ice block, kicking off the end of humanity. So we've talked about all the pieces. What does all of this look like? Will look something like this, and I deliberately choose a Russian test because I think it's just that much more haunting. Watch for the shockwave.
Мы наблюдали это с расстояния 70 километров. Какое-то количество людей находилось ближе. Одного солдата, находившегося в канаве, засыпало песком, и один солдат погиб. В одном из близлежащих сел население было все выведено из зданий.
You see the camera shake, and that's miles and miles away.
Взрыв выглядел из города Курчатова, центра Семипалатинского полигона. Ослепительная вспышка и ударная волна сотрясли город. В домах вылетели все стекла. Это кадры из фильма, который был снят специально для показа руководству страны.
How do we know so much? Well, we tested it.
Survival Town.
Atom test measured a model village in the Nevada desert against the awesome power of nuclear energy. Buildings of various materials went up. $1 million worth of equipment was installed, including lifelike mannequins, and tons of food to measure the contamination caused by radiation. The big dolls were Survival Town's sole inhabitants. Tanks took part in their first atomic maneuvers, some less than a mile away, the closest yet in any test. Nearly 6,000 persons participated, including troops sheltered by trenches. Many cameras in many locations filmed the single blast. Wreckage in the desert held vital information on how to survive an enemy attack. With Geiger counters to check the radiation, experts assessed the damage. An aluminum building was left a gaping wreck. Concrete or cinder block houses weathered the blast best. This one was less than a mile away. Survival Town's electric wires had become a twisted, tangled mass. Demonstrating the importance of civil defense preparedness, the elaborate exercises proved survival is possible, offering new hope to all who live in the shadow of the atomic age.
And all it takes to launch one of these off is this. Some 30 minutes to target. Or from sea, from beneath the waves, those missiles can be launched. From submarines you never knew were there. And those are usually just about 10 minutes to their target. In all this, there are two types of nuclear war. Full-scale nuclear war is the world-destroying stuff, the stuff that we know is bad. But there's also the thoughts of limited nuclear war, that nuclear weapons could be used on a battlefield like any other weapon, that this could just be the next bullet. And obviously neither of these have been used, but I pulled this screenshot from a Yahoo story earlier this year. We're trying to convince that, oh, hey, no, we could totally use limited nuclear weapons. No, it's a terrible idea, because once one starts with a nuclear weapon, what do you think they're going to respond with? Another limited nuclear weapon, and they're going to get bigger and bigger until we're at full-scale nuclear war. Like, unless you have a severe, like, this is going to stop here, and who's going to listen to that in the middle of a battle? There is no winning. There is only losing. That didn't stop us from trying it with an atomic cannon named Atomic Annie. Fill the gap left by the rising mushroom cloud. blast from the Atomic Annie cannon is about the same as that of Hiroshima, 15 megatons. And that isn't the most absurd we've done. We had a nuclear bazooka, and if anything's going to get this kicked off of YouTube, it's this video, but I'm going to give it a shot, and if it's not here, it'll be included at the end as a separate video, because we had a nuclear bazooka. But that didn't mean that using nuclear weapons around U.S. soldiers was not a thing. We tested this stuff. And we tested the ability to fight following a nuclear blast. It's rather surreal to see the bomb and U.S. soldiers in the foreground. Note the pressure wave after they saw the flash go by. The amount of people who were irradiated is astounding, and it's one of those things that as a country we really don't talk about. How many people suffered severely from cancers and related things later in life, from the inability to have children and so on, or whose children suffered severe birth defects because of all of this. We really have not dealt with this as a nation. And because in the name of state secrets, in the name of national defense, we've kind of ignored it all and swept it under the rug and pretended like it wasn't our fault. We tested the bomb all over the place. All of the Pacific is our doing, with few exceptions. That these are all of the blasts ever in the world as of 2015. And that's quite a few. You can tell that we really just did not like Nevada. There's a lot of blasts there. And radiation carried on the winds has affected every state in the union. How much of an impact that actually has? Well, that depends on who you want to believe and how alarmist you are. But this has had a significant change on our world, and not just the countries that are participating in this. Nuclear testing in the South Pacific there had tremendous impact on the locals.
There's even more opportunity for radiation exposure at the end of the nuclear cycle, after the bomb explodes. Nations with nuclear weapons have exploded more than 2,400 of them, all in the name of testing and national security. The radioactive fallout from all that testing has boosted the level of background radiation around the entire globe, but the effects have been most keenly felt by people who lived on or near the testing areas. One hard-hit population lives on the Bikini Atoll, where the U.S. blew up 22 weapons over a 12-year period. Anthropologist and author Barbara Rose Johnston has researched the effects of these blasts on the island people.
I worked with the people of Rongelap. Rongelap is an atoll that is downwind from where we tested at Bikini and in Inuitak. Downwind meaning some 83 miles from where we tested our largest nuclear weapon, Bravo test, in March 1st, 1954. And the people on Rongelap were not evacuated as they had been for previous tests. The people were left for 3 days in fallout, like snow coming down, before they were evacuated. The first couple of years, almost half the women had either unable to carry a baby to term, or the children that were born were not recognizable as children. Over the years, that became a problem throughout the Marshall Islands. And the kinds of things that women were giving birth to, there were no Marshallese words to describe. They had to make up terms like jellyfish baby or grapes or things like that to describe the kinds of things they're giving birth to. Despite the fact that we knew that there were not only concerns and problems with radiation from fallout, and not only that people were getting sick and ill when we were documenting that, but we continued letting people live in a contaminated setting because those people didn't count very much. Because those people were Marshallese. They were a different color of skin. They were in the middle of the Pacific. They, in some of the quotes that I found in the classified informal discussion between scientists who were doing this work, some of those quotes talk about, well, these people they're more like us than mice. And in the context of the times that this work was being done, the Marshallese were considered less human.
It's astonishing, not only the impact of the bomb, but what we did in the name of the bomb, of making sure that we had the bigger, better weapon to ensure mutually assured destruction, how many people we were willing to sacrifice to this effort, people who did it of their own free will, like those U.S. soldiers, and people who were caught in the crossfires, like those on Rongelap, the Marshallese. All of this should scare you that, yes, the bomb is a terrible thing, that absolutely is still something. There are still some 1,500 nuclear weapons ready to go on this earth today, and they could be used literally at any time. We could be 30 minutes from destruction at any point to this day. Sure, the threat has kind of faded into the background. We worry more about terrorism and, well, quarantines from viruses today, but this is still real. This is still a thing. And I think I will link the CDC handout on what to do in case of fallout, because it's something they keep updated, because it could happen, and it could happen here. So I'm also going to link something to what's called Nuke Map. I actually met Alex Wellerstein, who put it together when I was at a class. It lets you look at what the impact of a nuclear strike would be anywhere in the world using any of the weapons that are recorded, and even hypothetical ones. And it gets in some pretty intense detail. So feel free to mess with that. It gives you something to do while you're in quarantine. Again, everything is optional, but helping pass the time by gathering knowledge is certainly not the worst thing to do. All right, thank you everybody for listening, and I'll come back with some more history in a bit.